Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Zafar Hashemi, Rumsfeld Fellow, Afghanistan chapter, class of 2016. It's an honor to be here sitting with this stellar panel trying to unpack some of the most pressing issues that the region is facing today, either directly, mere because of the geography, or indirectly because of the complicated relationship that this region has with the rest of the world. Before I start, let's do some housekeeping rules. Whatever I say in this podium is just my own opinion, not that of my employer, and it's only through my affiliation with the CAMCA network. Whew. So I hope that saved my mortgage and coverage for my children's health insurance coverage. And on the format, I'm going to unpack a number of hot topics that involves the region, and I will ask my panelists to pick and choose one or many and all of them and express their opinions in forms of questions that I'll be asking, but I would like to keep it as briefly as possible because we only have less than 1 hour. My hope is that we will be able to give all of you an opportunity to think and ask your questions. So with that, let's start. On January 1st, 2024, Nagorno-Karabakh ceased to exist as a state. Will that end the hostility between Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, and finally allow the countries to think about and take steps to normalize their relationship, which will lead to mutual cooperation? In February of 2023, the UN voted that Russia must end the war in Ukraine immediately. Georgia voted yes. Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, and Mongolia voted in absentee. And Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan did not vote at all. This kind of dance on thin ice to keep both Washington and Moscow happy. How is that faring for the region, for the CAMCA region countries? And what are the effects of the sanctions that West has placed on Russia, on economies of this region that is heavily reliant on its trade with Russia? In March of 2024, ISIS-K, or the Daesh in Khorasan, which operates out of Afghanistan and Central Asia, claimed responsibility for the deadly attack in Moscow, raising the alarm bells in all of the region about a potential of extremism that is turning into a new reality. On the one hand, you have the Tajik president coming out and saying that first he's a proud Tajik, then he is a Muslim. Is that a reaction to what's happened in Moscow? Because all the culprits happened to be Tajik citizens. But on the other hand, you have Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan delisting the Taliban from its terrorist list, one of the first country on earth to do so and go as far as that. And at the same time, Uzbekistan heavily investing in its relationship with the Taliban, all of which indicates that the Central Asian countries are doing a gambit to ensure that through trade and cooperation, they will keep the threat of terrorism at bay inside Afghanistan, and hoping that the Taliban would not allow all the Central Asian terrorist groups that are in Afghanistan to do exactly what the Taliban did in Afghanistan. That is to topple the government, come in power, and bring Sharia and Islam according to their own interpretation. Is that an appeasement policy or a practical approach? And how will that look like in the future? So with all of these, I'm going to start with my panelists who absolutely need no introduction. for their achievements, their expertise and experience about global affairs, particularly of this region. But if you're still interested and inclined, you have booklet in front of you that have their bios. So with that, Ambassador Matthew Bryza, unpack any and all of them.
The answer is 7. No. That is an amazing, deeply thoughtful and insightful set of questions about the challenges the U.S. grappled with for the last, almost 30 years in this region. But first, I want to thank Dr. Starr and Dr. Cornell and Dato Sumbadze and this whole CAMCA team for making this possible. It's amazing how this has grown into such a consequential event. So, I, as former U.S. mediator of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and ambassador to Azerbaijan, I'm tempted to start with that one, but I want to go maybe a little bit more strategic. And as you were speaking, I remembered a moment in October of 2001, so a month after the 9/11 events, and I walked into my boss's office, Ambassador Dan Fried at the time in the White House, opened the door, and there was President Bush standing there with Condoleezza Rice, the National Security Advisor. And she said, Mr. President, I want to introduce you to our Central Asia guy. And I said, yeah, but I'm also working on the South Caucasus and Turkey. And she said, yes, but this is our Central Asia guy. So what that showed to me how strategically we had an idea, or the President and Secretary, or soon-to-be Secretary Rice, had this idea that the center of gravity of the U.S. response to the 9/11 attacks should be Central Asia. And, the day after, so September 12th, President Haidar Aliyev at the time of Azerbaijan reached out to our ambassador in Baku, Ross Wilson at the time, and said, anything that you need to respond, we're with you. Air, land, sea, whatever you need, we're with you till the end. But that was creating a corridor across Georgia, dear foreign minister and greatest friend, in Azerbaijan, into Central Asia. And so we had this idea that we needed a strategic concept. We thought of Central Asia as being, as Dr. Starr and I were talking about, and as Svante mentioned, connected, absolutely connected to the South Caucasus, hopefully not only in an abstract sense, but also via oil and gas pipelines from Central Asia that really didn't fully materialize through the Caucasus to Turkey, or to Georgia, Turkey, and the EU. You remember the Guam, right? Georgia, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, and Moldova. It became the Guam, with Uzbekistan even joining it for a while after 9/11. Mm-hmm. But then we kind of lost our strategic vision. We lost our sense of working together with South Caucasus and Central Asia to bring everybody basically toward the transatlantic community. And I'm not sure that's bad. Because also, as Dr. Rice said at one point, after we tried this for a while, Central Asia is in Asia. And so maybe we need to think about multi-vectors and helping the Central Asian countries connect with South Asia. And lo and behold, we ended up reorganizing, and now we have it, in the State Department South and Central Asia Bureau. So what that did, though, it led to us not having a clear and integrated strategic vision. And I think to make all of our strategic ambitions come true, whether they be in the commercial sector, let's say on logistics and energy transport, or politically, we really need to think about, as Dr. Starr and I were talking about, how Azerbaijan and then the countries on the other side of the Caspian, here, but Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, work together, especially on logistics routes, to create corridors that complement each other rather than compete with each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Farid, I'm going to go with you first. That was the perspective from Washington. I want you to focus on what's happening in the region and help us understand how the region sees these developments and how they are adjusting their actions and reactions to the issues that I brought in my introduction. Dr. Shafiyev?
For me? Yes.
Please.
Well, thank you very much. First, I would like to thank CAMCA and especially two people. Thanks to them, probably I'm here. It's Professor Frederick Starr and Svante Cornell. Let me first to challenge a bit your question about Nagorno-Karabakh. It was never state. It was occupied territory and fully subordinated to supply and economy, everything to Armenia. And for many years, Azerbaijan advocated for principle of territorial integrity. Unfortunately, when it came to what's the Ambassador Bryza said, strategic concept, the support territorial integrity of our friends, Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, came unequivocally. But when it came to Azerbaijan, thanks to Armenian lobby, the American position sometimes was ambiguous. And one of the witnesses of such, the power of Armenian lobby is the Ambassador Bryza himself, because highly qualified diplomat who was his candidacy was rejected by U.S. Congress, unfortunately. Yeah. But in Azerbaijan, he is always the best ambassador of United States in Azerbaijan. You also mentioned about the voting. I would like also to make this fact check. Azerbaijan, in 2014, when the Crimea was occupied, Azerbaijan voted in favor of the Ukrainian territorial integrity and consistently supported Ukrainian territorial integrity. These days in Berlin, there is the conference on the humanitarian aid to Ukraine, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan pledged the additional humanitarian help. But the problem here, what the countries of the Central Asia and the South Caucasus, and I'm speaking about Azerbaijan, is facing sometimes big pressure from the regional geopolitical powers. And Azerbaijan, unfortunately, does not have the luxury of the support which some other countries has. Even 10% of that support from the West did not come to Azerbaijan at the critical moment. So for that reason, Azerbaijan had to take into account the pressure and the power of countries around it, Russia first of all. So in the latest voting, you can see that. But I also would like, because of the lack of time, to just say a few words of what the Ambassador Bryza began about the strategic concept. Mm-hmm. I think the Americans in 90s, when the countries get independence, started very well, supporting energy projects and etc. And then I think from the Obama administration, that kind of strategy was lost. And I still believe that the American foreign policy is still not clear what kind of foreign policy they are pursuing in the Caspian region. So that should be really rectified, hopefully, with the next administration, whether it will be still the Biden or new administration, but need the clear policy. And one thing is also important to understand that these countries, where is the region. Don't force those countries to make choices, either with us or you are against us. You know, there is China, it's the neighbor, trading partner. There is also Russian factor. You mentioned Afghanistan, and I mean there are some other factors here, the security threat. So if we coming back to U.S. policy, indeed we need clearly formulated, taking into account all these local peculiarities, consistent U.S. foreign policy.
And on that local peculiarities, I'm going to go to Ambassador Gela. The controversial foreign agent law that was overridden, in Georgia, a lot of protests, proponents saying that it brings accountability and stifles foreign influence, while the opponents say this stifles the vibrant civil society in Georgia and shatters the dreams of Georgians to one day join the European Union. On the one hand, you have Washington who says, we're going to reevaluate our relationship and the amount of assistance that we provide to Georgia. And on the other hand, you have Kremlin who's not saying anything except referring through a spokesperson to the Foreign Agent Act that is enacted in the United States. Talk about the local peculiarities that oftentimes the West and the US is accused of not being so observant and careful in threading the relationship with this part of the world?
Well, thank you. Actually, the Georgian landscape is too small, comparable with the chessboard that we are talking about, and it's just an episode. And I'm not really personally very much worried about what is going on in Georgia because of my strong belief that the Georgian people will not allow autocracy to prevail over democratic governance. So things happen, 30 years of independence, the Georgian people are 30 years on the streets defending their freedom, so we got used to it. I'm not really worried about it. It is an unfortunate episode, but we will overcome it. But I would rather spend this, precious time to give the audience the context of the complexity that you described and diversity in the CAMCA region. And I just will borrow the very interesting concept of a famous book from Zbigniew Brzezinski about the Grand Chessboard, when he called this, Eurasian mass as a center of global power. That's a quote. And what you described very well in your introduction, how complex is the center of global power. And a lot of things are happening in the center of global power. It's in a shaking mode, and it's very significant for the global security. So let me give you a few highlights and the context of what we're talking about. What is going on the chessboard? So you have aggression in Ukraine, aggression unjustified, brutal, by the permanent member of the Security Council. Russia is supposed to be responsible for global security and the world order. And if we talk about the chessboards, and our title is a chessboard, the chess is an intellectual game with strict rules, although black and white. And the geopolitics are not black and white, actually, but the war makes it black and white. And it is unfortunate that we have a black and white situation now on that battlefield. In my view, what is happening in Ukraine is not a battlefield about the territory or even Russia's, let's say, empirical ambition. It's larger. We're dealing with a clash of ideologies. We are dealing with a battlefield of democracy versus autocracy. And that's much more significant than just a piece of territory that Russia is going to take. So it's a much more bigger. So we have a war going on in a very important global center of power, which has an impact on everything we do in Georgia, in Central Asia, and beyond, because the players on a chessboard are going to determine how the world will look like in the next 30 years, because outcome of the war in a battlefield in Ukraine will determine how world will look like in 10 years from now. We have, besides those challenges and really scary developments that you described, because we're all different, the countries in the Central Asia are different. We in the Caucasus are different. We are different than Azeris are different than Armenians and so on. But there are certain positive things that I would like to outline, not to give the audience just a scary gray zone picture. So it's not. I mean, the ambassador Hakala now described the engagement of EU in Central Asia. And it's a good news because, when I was in the government, when I was doing active diplomacy, the EU was not in existence here. And now we are seeing the very active engagement of EU, much more better policy of the United States in Central Asia than it used to be. We have a good examples, by the way, of the leadership of the United States when we were developing this. It has been mentioned, the pipeline diplomacy of 90s, and under the leadership of the United States, the projects have made a big, impactful difference in the region for a good. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying in the context of what Ambassador Hakala said, the European Union engagement, besides the economic interest of the European Union, also is, and in my view, would be better for the European Union to envelop the potential of the Central Asian country individually and collectively. So comparative advantages, that's what makes us stronger. And then we will put them resources together, we'll put comparative advantages together. Then the region, the whole CAMCA region, Central Asia, Caucasus, will be much more interested on a map for bigger global players, for China, European Union, United States. So what I'm saying is that we need to create here the environment of competitive advantages, show them, envelop them. So European Union role and US role is to help each individual Central Asian country and Caucasus countries to understand better what is where we are strong. What where we are strong put together and started to be the word connectivity was mentioned here many times. The connectivity is about advantages. So for China and European Union to increase their 80 billion trade balance, that's very big incentive to play a positive role for China, for example. What we can do here, let's explore our opportunities. That's what I'm saying. The same happens in Caucasus, for example.
Yeah.
When the Karabakh conflict is resolved, there is a great opportunity for three of us to sit down and say where our comparative advantage is to help connectivity, to help Central Asia, to help the countries to create a corridor of peace. The corridor, not only transport corridor, but corridor of peace. That's something that I wanted to.
Great, thank you, thank
Focus
you.
on.
Ambassador Javlon, Vakhabov. Yes, let's stick to the chess analogy and make it a little complicated, even though we're not in the business of hypotheticals. But talking about the managing relationship of these small countries with the bigger powers, being Moscow and Washington, something is to happen in Taiwan, and it's going to make it even more complicated. One narrative that Ambassador Gela talked about, the way the war in Ukraine is seen, how is that going to affect this threat balancing act between these small countries here and the bigger powers, and the impacts and the complication associated with that?
Thank you for this question. As you might be aware, I'm currently serving as a director for the government-funded research organization known as the International Institute for Central Asia, a think tank that was established 3 years ago as part of the President's Neighbors First policy efforts that he actually launched right after he took his office, to trigger those unprecedented changes that we're all currently going through. And in this regard, just to underscore that this think tank is not only about Uzbekistan. So this is about my commitment to the region. This is about my government's commitment to Central Asia. Central Asia that we are envisioning as a prosperous, secure, and resilient region of the world. So in these terms, just would like to recall what I've been experiencing over the last 3-4 months inside this assignment. I've just recently returned from Dushanbe, Tajikistan, and this was the first my trip outside of Uzbekistan, just to explore opportunities for deeper regional integration processes, what we call in Uzbekistan. And now I'm here in Bishkek, and the day after tomorrow I'll be heading to Astana, doing the same job. And hopefully in 2 months I'll be visiting Turkmenistan, Ashgabat. And the key objective I'm pursuing to achieve in my current capacity is just to understand how these regional processes taking place in this part of the world are perceived by our immediate neighbors. And what I'm hearing from them is crystal clear and very simple. we are on the same page in terms of deepening and expanding our collaboration within the region of Central Asia. In the meantime, I made it very clear that...
Can you speak a little closer to the mic? Yes.
And now?
Yeah, it's better, I think.
Better?
I hope.
And I'm saying, so while in the region, I'm saying that don't think that the government of Uzbekistan seeks to dominate in the region. This is not our goal to achieve. And we're no longer pulling the blanket on ourselves. We're sharing it with our immediate neighbors. Just one example, actually, this was President Mirziyoyev who came up with this idea to summon presidential summits in Central Asia back in 2017 when he was addressing remarks to the United Nations member states. So also, although we came up with this, although we put forward this, so we warmly welcome it, the proposal by the Kazakhstani government to host the first presidential summit in Astana. No objections at all. And again, back to my trip to Dushanbe. So another vivid testament what's currently happening in this part of the world. I recall my previous visit to the capital city of Tajikistan back in 2014. You know, and the trip itself took almost 23 hours to get Dushanbe. 23 hours. The plane actually took off from Tashkent and landing in Termez, southern part of Uzbekistan, and then we got a car crossing the border where interrogated, although we possessed diplomatic passports for another couple of hours, and then we, you know, what I've experienced recently, it took only 40 minutes. The plane and land in Tajikistan. And prior to 2016, it was unthinkable to see the Tajikistani airlines operating direct flights between Tashkent and Dushanbe. With respect to our future endeavors, I'm pursuing quite ambitious, I believe will at some point to create our regional organization. And in these terms, we do have a huge support by our immediate neighbors. And in this, at the same time, unfortunately, we remain the only region so in the world without its structure. But in the meantime, Central Asia as a world region has been recognized by the United Nations. And currently, our region is engaging with, just imagine, with 39 countries within these C5 plus platforms. Countries generate 45% of global GDP, with almost 30% of global population, and sharing so the territories, 27% of territories of sovereign nations. This is how, I mean, the region itself is by the world community. But in the meantime, we said to our neighbors, we stand ready to go further, as far as our neighbors would like to do the same. With respect to other countries, particularly so Azerbaijan is a country that is also free, and I believe will be very much welcomed so by the region of Central Asia to see this country joining our regional cooperation efforts as well. Yes, Armenia, Georgia, and even Afghanistan, that the countries that we consider as an integral part of Central Asia might join these efforts at some point in the future as well. So regarding those big powers surrounding, centering, I would say, the region of Central Asia. It's not an easy job to make this well-balanced policy that the Uzbekistan foreign policy is actually based on. But in the meantime, even with respect to Russia, Russia remains our key trade partner, number 2, among others. Russia is a home for almost 2 million Uzbekistani labor migrants, people who are sharing their wages, remittances with their close ones back at home. Almost 1 million ethnic Russians are currently residing in Uzbekistan. So with respect to the United States, I can say the same. With respect to China, so we are working with everyone, especially when this kind of multi-vector approach by the Uzbekistan government meets our own people's needs. So this is a way how we are currently handling
Thank you.
This pretty challenging part of the world.
Yes, thank you for that.
Can we go back to Russia and US? Is that okay?
Absolutely. I just want to point out that it's refreshing to hear about that flight situation, which is a very good thing, but also at the same time, we don't have Tajik fellows here today because of the problems, the government-to-government problems. And at the same time, 2 years in a row, Bishkek and Almaty, we could not secure visa for Afghanistan fellows because of the problem. So, James, you were right. I was going back to the US because we started it, and Ambassador Gela talked about lack of clarity on the US's part when it comes to its policies in this region. We have election years, you've written about it. Take us home.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about U.S.-Russia because the Central Asia guy is right. The U.S. Needs a new foreign policy, and that's actually generally agreed to by Republicans and Democrats, right and left. Now, I will say that this kind of, caricature of the choices are isolationism or internationalism is nonsense. Most Americans don't believe that. That's not what they want. The reality is when you hear the term great power competition, that's not going anywhere. The United States' 3 major adversarial powers in the world today are China, Russia, and Iran. And that's not going to change. And mostly because they don't want it to change. But the question is, which gets to his point, is what about the rest of the world? And so kind of the old way we used to do this is, well, we'll just divide the world into these big blocks. One, that's a bad idea, and 2 is it's just not going to work. So what should the focus of U.S. foreign policy is going to be, and what I do believe it is going to evolve into, is this idea of linking free and open spaces together, essentially enabling people to make their own choices about connectivity and relationships. And I think the middle corridor is one of the most important ones. And when we talk about the middle corridor, I really think it is about linking Central Asia to the global markets. And it's not just the middle corridor in and of itself, which makes, I think, the middle corridor so important, because if you have a viable middle corridor, first of all, you're into the Black Sea, and if you have a free and open Black Sea, you're automatically linking to the 3 Seas initiatives and an economic, digital, and energy partner of over 100 million people. And then you're going to link through the increasing connectivity that we're going to see connecting the Middle East to Asia, because I do believe that the natural and the only operational and economically viable land corridor will be that Korea and Japan and Taiwan and India are linking through the Middle East, through an expanded corridor in the Middle East, and then the Black Sea into the middle corridor. And that also creates all kinds of new opportunities in the Mediterranean, linking with North Africa and East Africa and West Africa. So I think that's the most transformative thing in world geopolitics that's going to happen. The United States are to be the world's biggest cheerleader for that. Now, I think the question is what can the nations of the region do to help facilitate the momentum that's going to happen anyway? Can I offer 2 real quick? So one of them is, not that I don't love lobbyists, right, and big organizations, but you actually don't need lobbyists and big organizations to put momentum behind this. And I'll give you an example. After the end of the Cold War, none of our new NATO partners were in the visa waiver program. And the way that changed was the embassies of the nations got together, and it wasn't a formal organization, but the embassies of the nations got together and they worked with legislators on the Hill to create momentum for legislative change that allowed the vast number of European nations that were not in visa waiver to join. That, I think, is an eminently reproducible model for the Central Asian countries who, I think if I'm honest, I will definitely say that several of the embassies have upped their game, but there are lots of initiatives that right now they could be working on that they could move on the hill. So I'll give you an example. So I think at least 4 of the countries are still under Jackson-Vanik prohibitions, which is an antiquated thing. And it's just that nobody's updated the law. There's already dozens of American legislators that would like to change the law to recognize that this shouldn't apply to all the Central Asian states. That is an easy thing that the embassies could get together and work on, and they could move on the hill, and there's probably several others. So on the informal things, there's so much that can be done. I will say there's one, I wouldn't call it an organization, but there's one project that I think would really create a framework for a plug and play for both the United States and Europe, and that is to kind of reproduce the idea of the 3 Cs initiative. And the magic of the 3 Cs initiative isn't so much the fund and the structure, which actually hasn't produced very much, but it's created a brand that's globally recognizable. We see Koreans, Japanese, Indians connecting with Europe. They're interested in this. We need the Middle Corridor brand, right? So we need the Middle Corridor project, and it has to include the 5 Central Asian countries and Azerbaijan and Georgia and Armenia. You already have a partial structure to do that through the Organization of Turkic States, which includes everybody but Armenia and Georgia. But I think that's the global brand that you need to really get things going.
Thank you. Ambassador Matthew Bryza.
You just call him Mr. Central Asia. He'll respond to that.
To piggyback on what James said about creating the space for these countries to allow them to do whatever they want to do in order to reach prosperity. Sometimes that doesn't play out well with the interpretation of bigger powers. The controversial law in Georgia, the outcome of which a lot of European and, of course, Washington does not approve. Let's talk about, our host country. Because of actions of the current government, the media independence ranking dropped in a matter of 1 year by 50 points, which got a lot of criticism from human rights as well as independent media organizations from outside. So, but the government here justifies those actions that led to that drop in the rate. What is a good space, and how do we ensure that whatever these countries are doing are acceptable to the bigger players in the chessboard?
Hello. I'm so glad you asked that question. I wanted to pick up exactly on James's point about finding a way to let the countries here in the CAMCA region choose for themselves what their alignment would be. And I alluded to it when I said, we readjusted from thinking our strategic need is to pull these countries toward the transatlantic family. Yeah. Whereas these countries, the Central Asian ones are Asian and may have a different set of policy choices. And if you think of a country like Kazakhstan, how complex the choices are. For example, when the uprising happened, whatever we want to call it, in Almaty, and President Tokayev called in Russian troops to quell the uprising, yet a few months later, he was calling on his energy sector to come up with non-Russian export routes up to 100,000 barrels per day for Kazakhstani oil. So my point is there's really no way to sort out the geopolitical tensions in an elegant formula. I think what needs to drive the future relations of all of these countries with the rest of the world is the private sector. Easy for me to say now that I'm in the private sector, but the major infrastructure projects are not going to be paid for by governments. It's going to be the private sector. So I spent the vast majority of my diplomatic career working on what became the Middle Corridor. Oil and gas pipelines from Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey, ended up being the EU. I'm as true a believer in the Middle Corridor as there could ever be. But there is a great opportunity for north-south routes. And I've been studying and working on a project to move commodities that are relevant to global food security from Central Asia, where they're produced, through Afghanistan to Pakistani ports and to the global marketplace. The US hates the Taliban regime, doesn't want to work with it, massive sanctions, frozen assets. Yet, what I've remarkably discovered in the last couple of years is moving cargo across Afghanistan has become a lot easier now because the Taliban is so extreme, but it has cut out so much of the corruption and the multiple mouths that there used to be to feed along the transit routes that is actually, from a business perspective, more efficient to move low-value cargoes, like, in my case, sulfur. Sulfur is an important input for fertilizers. Nobody wants just to get sulfur. Sulfur is a byproduct of oil processing in Kazakhstan that needs to be disposed of, but it's of value to fertilizer producers. So the sulfur is moving fine across Afghanistan. And the U.S. Treasury Department, OFAC, even though it's the enforcer of U.S. sanctions against any country but against the Taliban regime, has carved out a special license for moving commodities that are relevant to global food security across Afghanistan, even allowing payments to the regime. So it's a long-winded way of saying I fully embrace what James said. The countries need to choose for themselves what their identities are, but also how they're going to manage their economic relationships, especially for a country, all these countries that are landlocked, or like Uzbekistan, doubly landlocked. And I think the private sector needs to have the ability to pull the train forward, but realistically, of course, the US and China and Russia and Iran are also going to be vying for their influence in the region and will be disruptive of the private sector being able to do this.
Thank you. James, I'm going to come back to you quickly, if you may. Prerequisites for this trade, case of Afghanistan, the Taliban, a terrorist organization not recognized by any country, yet in the middle of a very strategic place that would open a lot of doors that everyone has been talking about for years now.
Yeah, no, look, I'll just say, look, all that's great, but I mean, the future of prosperity in Central Asia is not going to be running sulfur through Afghanistan. No. I think the reality is the high value, the big payoff is in the middle corridor, and that's, but to its point is the whole idea of free and open spaces is not about dictating, it's about creating a set of mutually acceptable engagements and then going from there. And this is, I think, the big shift that we need in American foreign policy. It's not telling the rest of the world what to do. It's saying, when it makes sense for us to partner together, how do we do that efficiently? And this is what we lack. We really don't have those mechanisms to have the kind of conversations. We don't have this every day. And can I have a show of hands, how many Americans are in the room? Yeah, okay, point made, right? So we're not getting the connectivity, the level of connectivity we need to, because there ought to be as many Americans in the room as there are the people from the other 33 countries here talking about the potential for connectivity.
Thank you. No.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to open the floor for a question in just 1 minute, but before that, I would ask the three of our remaining panelists if they have any thoughts, any reflections to whatever has been discussed so far before we go to the questions while our audience thinks about what they want to ask.
Just
please.
Just to add to my point about countries' comparative advantages and what I build on what my colleagues have said. Just an example, in order to be different, but also to find a way of cooperation for a greater good, there is no need, for example, for our neighbors to choose the same path, the same way as Georgia does, for example. But the candidate status for European Union and eventually membership in European Union of Georgia will be a great advantage for CAMCA region. The Turkey will benefit out of it, Azerbaijan will benefit out of it in some way. The greater strategy for a Black Sea security, for example, that we have been working for years. We've been explaining in Washington, in Berlin, in Paris, the necessity of the strategy, because middle corridor and or central corridor, whatever you call it, is not going to work. without a sound strategy of Black Sea security. And you see what is going on the Black Sea, and the battlefield is there now. I mentioned Ukraine, war against Ukraine. So the point is here, we need to find out, European Union, United States, well, all of us, we need to find the ways, being different. There are countries in a region, in Central Asia, for example, the members of the Eurasian Custom Union, for example. There are countries that are member of SCTO, the security arrangement,
Right.
and it's not for us to tell them what to choose. I mean, every country chooses its own security umbrella or format. But regardless of that, we can find a comparative advantages that will unite us anyway, because it will be a greater potential envelope. So the point is that the situation is not as hopeless as we see it.
Thank you for that.
There are opportunities still.
Yes, thank you. Please.
Very briefly, we talked about cooperation, and now, you know, the title is the navigation. So what's the direction? And I would say 4 projects mentioned by my colleagues. James talked about Middle Corridor. That's the one. The second, Gela talked about South Caucasus platform, 3 countries, Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan. Initiative was put forward 2 years ago by President Aliyev, and then the Prime Minister Garibashvili also supported. So I think this is something C5 plus Azerbaijan or plus the Caucasus. And one more is the Organization of Turkish States. Someone told it, yes, James, you told, and also the Ambassador Hakala talked about that. And here we have to add one more important element to all these 4 projects. It's the Turkey, because it's the pivotal state. You talked about Black Sea. That's how this connection is made to European Union, to United States.
Thank you. And now let's open it to questions. All right, can we get the microphone, please?
Hi.
Oh,
Sorry.
go ahead.
My name is Sobir Kurbanov. I'm Tajik American, the only Tajik here in the room, because I came with American passport, I guess.
Glad to have you here.
Yeah, and I represent Center for International Private Enterprises, US-based NGO, working an affiliate of US Chamber of Commerce, and I'll be facilitating a panel tomorrow. But my question mostly to Ambassador Javlon Vakhabov and also other speakers. You spoke about the value of Central Asia, unity and organization. So a very practical question, and also I think Dr. Starr also spoke this morning that we need the Central Asia organization. How you see practically the format of the Central Asia or wider CAMCA regional organization? What kind of institutional format it should shape? Is it going to be government-led, business-led? What is the kind of public-private dialogue solutions you foresee to foster that kind of regional integration? We understand that this is a collection of different states. Each state has its own national policies, kind of market protection policies. But we also see that Central Asia is stronger together as a C5 plus. And it's not against any kind of superpowers. It's to make Central Asia stronger vis-a-vis external markets, make it more competitive, make it more prosperous. So, but I think we need we need to think about what that kind of format of this regional organization should shape and how it should interact with experts, with businesses, how it should be inclusive, how it should be kind of subnational, but not kind of over-imposing on the national policies. These are complex questions, and I think diplomats like Ambassador Vakhabov, you have a unique vision for this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's take one more question here. Here at the very front row, please.
Hello, my name is Reinis Stachalovskis. I'm from Latvia. And I want to ask, how do you think, what is going to be Russia's response to Central Asia's efforts to integrate more with European Union and West, knowing that they have intentions to keep the political influence in the region?
Thank you. Please, any of you feel free to chime in.
Can I just jump back to the first question again?
Sure.
Because I know there's this kind of obsession about organizational structure, but I think there's people misunderstand the immense amount, particularly in Washington, work that you can get down without a big structure and organization, secretary and everything. So I just want to reemphasize this idea about if embassies get together, what they can accomplish. Actually, you reminded me of another idea. The U.S. has a Black Sea strategy. Not because Americans thought, hey, let's have a Black Sea security strategy. It was because our regional partners said, you guys need to take this seriously. And it was actually the active engagement of the embassies in the US that really prompted both the legislation and the government to respond to a strategy of that. So that's another example that model can really, really work. The other thing is and you know, again, I'm not a political, I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, I do vote. I can't tell you who the next president's gonna be, but if it is a Republican presidents, and particularly, you know, President Trump, historically love the idea of working bilaterally. And there's a great way to do that, is if several of our bilateral partners come to us and say the same thing, that has an enormous amount of influence. So if my Azerbaijan partner comes in and says, this is great, and my Uzbek partner comes in and says, oh, that Azerbaijan guy, he is so smart, why didn't I think of that? That actually has a lot of power and influence in the US. Because the other thing is to your point, is it's so difficult to get a big regional grouping with the diverse geopolitical interests and speak with one voice on things that are important. It's easy to get everybody together and talk about nothing, because they can all agree to that. But on the really tough issues, to make people more prosperous and secure and safe, you're not going to get unanimity on this. So you get it where you can find it, and I think that's often done on a more informal level.
Ambassador Javlon, the US next administration, whatever it is, would like to have a lot of people coming from this region and saying the same thing. How could this region do that?
I guess it's quite arguable issue. We're all disputing with each other, but my firm belief is about a single Central Asia that lives in peace and tranquility with each other. I mean, countries located in this part of the world. Answering your question, how we are envisioning structurally, so the regional entity I mentioned above, I would say it's very ambitious, but very doable goal to achieve. But there are so many buts to achieve this goal. And at this moment, we still believe that when we are positioning as a firm fist, so the same perception we might have from outside. And the reason why we are calling on our immediate neighbors to go further with regional cooperation, with regional integration processes, so that this united, more engaged and supportive Central Asia might be attractive for foreign direct investments, especially given the fact that Central Asia provides almost 80 million customers to those who are looking for new opportunities in a challenging time we're all facing nowadays. It might simplify to find out new markets for local producers, those who are trying to diversify final destinations for their value-added goods. And of course, United Central Asia might bring more travelers, obviously, right?
Sure.
Prior to the pandemic, we've been hosting almost 9 million foreigners visiting Uzbekistan. Unfortunately, COVID-19 killed everything. And now we are trying to resume these figures. And last year, 6.5 million foreign tourists visited Uzbekistan. And just imagine, 2.5 of them came from neighboring Tajikistan. So most of those tourists coming from neighboring countries. And of course, our paramount goal to achieve is to see when this so-called Great Silk Road visa is introduced to every single nation in this part of the world, that foreigners coming from abroad will never be required to issue to get a visa to enter the region of Central Asia. So regarding the I would say the best examples would like to apply to the region in terms of structuring it, in terms of creating our regional entity. There are a lot of examples, bad and good examples. Of course, Brexit is not the best example to us, right? With some members still disputing with other member states within one unity is not the best example to us. But what we are looking at is ASEAN. What we are looking at is NB8, Nordic Council member states plus Baltic states. What we are looking at other entities, regional organizations currently operating in Americas as well.
Thank you. Ambassador Bryza, you wanted to chime in.
On the Russia question, you as a Latvian know better than I ever could that Russia's view will remain colonialist toward the Baltic states, South Caucasus, and Central Asia forever. And it's largely a matter of geography, and the Central Asian states are at a disadvantage because of geography. So what I've observed is as Russia's prestige has been destroyed by its invasion, full-scale invasion of Ukraine, second invasion of Ukraine, it's grown very aggressive in Central Asia. So in Uzbekistan, in the energy sector in particular through Gazprombank, it's super aggressive in trying to maintain and strengthen control over as many of those assets as possible. When it comes to Kazakhstan, I already mentioned the point about what President Tokayev did after asking for Russian troops to come to quell the uprising. Then he said, okay, energy sector, you need to find a way to export 100,000 barrels per day via a basically CPC route, so non-Russian route. And then in Turkmenistan, I'll take one more minute. In Turkmenistan, we saw President Berdimuhamedow Serdar come out a couple of years ago and say, after Azerbaijan's victory over Armenia in the Second Karabakh War, okay, we want to open to the west. We're going to export our energy resources westward. And then the chairman of the Milli Majlis, his father and predecessor, said, no, we're not ready yet. That reminds me of a conversation I was involved with in 1999 when then President Turkmenbashi of Turkmenistan said, the Russians tell me that if we continue to export our natural gas north to Russia, Turkmenistan will be stable and prosperous, and you will be a safe and very wealthy man. But if that gas is exported to the west, none of those things will be true. So there's intimidation that's continuing, I think, on leadership like of President Berdimuhamedow. And the last point is the Turkish natural gas trading hub. I spent the lion's share of my career with then Foreign Minister Bezhuashvili helping the countries develop their east-west pipeline routes. Throughout this entire period of President Putin's reign, his goal has been to insert Russia somehow in the supply chain between the EU and Turkey. And he's got it now with this. As he slipped in his press conference the last time he met with President Erdogan, he called it a Turkish hub for Russian natural gas. That's what it is. It's designed as a backdoor for Russian natural gas into the EU, even after 2027, when the EU says it wants no more natural gas. So they're fighting hard, using energy as the main lever, which is why the U.S. focused with Georgia and Azerbaijan and Turkey way back when in the late 90s on diversification of exports of Caspian oil and gas.
Thank you. And we have one more question. And one more on the other side.
Thank you so much. You discussed very interesting topics.
Can you introduce yourself? And
Sure. My name is Farhad. I'm studying anthropology and international development at the American University of Central Asia. My research interest is in energy between Afghanistan and Central Asia. However, my question is a bit different. So I believe traditionally Central Asia is the geopolitical trapeze of Russia. However, recently the influence of European countries, the United States of America, as well as China is growing. My specific question is how the Central Asian countries should cope with this geopolitical interest of different countries or different powers in this region, which from one side they should benefit from mutual relation, and from another side they should avoid crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. And one more question on the very last part. That would be the very last question.
Do you plan to streamline and formalize the visa process for individual entrepreneurs so that they can come and start business? So if I have a visa application that is valid here in Kyrgyzstan, I can do business across all 10 countries.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very
Excellent
much.
questions. You want to?
Yeah. Two points
Sure.
on Russian reaction. You know, we kind of in Georgia became experts in
Passionate experts,
in that
I would say,
because-
Ambassador.
because we have experienced on our skin all kind of nasty things that they can do, and they certainly will if they don't like your policies or they see the competitive advantages of the countries growing. And this is our goal, is to raise the competitive advantages of the countries. And for example, the great thing would be for a European Union engagement, US engagement, to again, to show to the countries in the Central Asia how can they benefit out of the normal civilized way of trade when your human capital is increased, when your work ethics are good, when the standards are in place, versus the very common economic practice of China or Russia, debt and trap, and the rest is the technique. So point is, we need to strengthen the countries with their own tools in order to feel the strengths to resist imminent reaction, and it can be very nasty. If they don't like your policies, your wine will be poisonous, your grain will be, poisonous. So, I mean, the economic blockade, deportation of your people. I mean, all kind of things we have experienced on our own skin. We survived. I'm okay. I'm not worried about my country destiny because we have done all of this. So the countries in Central Asia need to understand that if you getting stronger, on your comparative advantages, and you stay together somehow, then you have a chance to prosper.
Thank you. Dr. Farid, Shafiyev, you want to take the visa question?
Visa, I'm not sure that we really something closer to
Because
have
we
this.
ask our American panelists, then that would be considered as dictating from outside.
No, about common visa, but who knows in the future maybe, because I know that at some point Azerbaijan and Georgia was working on the common tourist routes. So maybe in the future it will be some common visa. So who knows, maybe even 3 countries common visa.
All right. Good. We're out of time, unfortunately, but I wanted this conversation to continue. So right now, the only thing between us, you, and lunch is an overdue round of applause for our wonderful panelists for this discussion. For you.